unto us a son is given, and his name shall be called Wonderful Counselor, Everlasting Father, and the Prince of Peace. It's Jesus. Oh, yeah. And he was born in Bethlehem of Judea, currently city in the region currently known as Palestine or the West Bank. Now, no political commentary meant. He was born to parents of Jewish descent, so this child was born as a Middle Eastern man, lived, ministered, and died, was resurrected as this Jewish man. Safe to say, he's not white. Merry Christmas, everybody.
What do you mean he's not white?
Weren't you listening?
I was. But everything that I see, he's white.
Merry Christmas, everybody.
Hey, I am Coy.
I'm Jesse.
We want to welcome you to the pulpit aside for another fun-filled episode. Maybe we should say challenging.
Yes, meaningful.
That's
Yes.
good. That's good.
We're recording this close to Christmas time. We'll call this our Christmas edition episode, closing out 2024. So in the spirit of and if you were here in person or watching a video, I'm wearing a really loud Christmas shirt.
You are.
In the jovial spirit of the holidays.
I just noticed that.
You just noticed.
Yeah.
Where you been?
I mean, I noticed the shirt, but I didn't think about the connection to Christmas. Oh, my goodness.
So in the spirit of Christmas today, we wanted to talk about the concept of white Jesus and why some people erroneously reject Jesus because they believe that, quote, Christianity is the white man's religion. Are they right? Are they wrong? So, Coy, I'm going to bat over to you.
You want to talk to the black guy in the room,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, start with you. Why do people talk about following Jesus as being, quote, a white man's religion or white Jesus? Because those things aren't actually real.
Right, they're not true.
But the idea is real to some people. Why do you think that is?
Well, I think the idea is real to some people because there are certain concepts that are real to people.
Okay.
For instance, concept number one is that you got a lot of Christians over in the United States traveling from, Europe, even when Christianity grows, throughout the Protestant Reformation. And you see a heavy influence of individuals who are white, whether they are German, Dutch, European, whatever. And then coming over to America and pushing, of course, Christianity. And so what we see when we think about Christianity is we often see it being associated with white people. That is real. That's what we see. Secondly, with regards to the white Jesus,
I'd say it's a fairly new phenomenon.
what's a fairly
Carry on.
Oh, well, we'll come back to that.
We'll come back to that. Oh, yes, we will. We do it today, too.
The second one that is a real concept or that we see all the time is, of course, the images of Jesus that are on churches throughout our country and throughout even other places, even due to Catholicism in its earlier days. So in certain places around the world, you see an image and a picture of Jesus that usually depicts a man who is white.
European looking.
Yeah, looks more like you in your earth color suit than me.
I look like Jesus?
Well, the
Or
images
Jesus
of him.
looks like
no.
me.
The images of Jesus that are painted around the world look more like you.
I think we hit something on there. Are we making images of Jesus in our image?
We are. Yeah, that's what has happened. Although, practically speaking, you can understand why if I'm going to, create an image of Jesus, which would be legitimate, we can't make an image of God,
right,
who's in heaven, but Jesus, making an image
person.
of a real person. If I was going to make an image of him or draw an image of him based upon, not really having seen him, then he's going to look like me. And what happens is over time, once you create an image and you start to kind of like, you recreate that image over and over again, copy, put it someplace else. And at some point, this image is not what people think of when they think of this.
Yeah.
As opposed to reading the Bible.
Well, yeah. No, it's true. And I think what you're saying makes sense. And I think there's a lot more to say about it. But the truth is actually, I saw this once in art throughout the world. when people make depictions of Jesus, many, many times it reflects the culture that art was created in.
Would make sense.
Does it?
Absolutely.
Why is that?
That's just because that's what we're used to. So if
you find ancient Chinese art, the Jesus and baby Jesus, he looks Chinese. You know, you go to India, same.
Sure.
You know, Africa, he's black. You know what I mean? Like, why?
Because we have a tendency again to create images of people that we don't have an actual image of, that more so reflects what we look like or what we're familiar with.
Yeah, that's true.
And so that's just like if I asked you, I was like, hey, think of a doctor. What do you naturally see when you think of a doctor?
Right.
Okay, I mean,
I think of a white dude.
Oh yeah, probably. I'm about to say probably male, probably
Middle-aged.
white. Yeah, that's just all right. Okay,
Because that's my experience.
because that's your experience.
Yeah.
Right? And so that's if you're constantly seeing people who look a certain way, and when you go to draw someone who you've never seen,
then you're
then you're gonna draw him the way you would see most people that you see.
Yeah, unless you are drawing from actual historical information, which
Yes, and I don't know that. Well, let me say this: in our society, from what I've seen in American history, American culture, we often didn't do the best job at depicting people culturally. We might have depicted what took place in telling a story, but we used who looked like us. So like I think the first Cleopatra movie, I think they used a white woman. Like wasn't it Elizabeth Taylor or something like that? My mom used to always talk about that. Like what in the world made them think that was even like close to what she would look like?
right.
She looked nothing like that.
Right.
But during that time, black actors and actresses weren't getting the same type of roles, even opportunities, and nor did I think a bunch of white people in America really wanted to see a true depiction of that. They would have rather seen something that looked more like them.
Huh. Interesting.
So, I mean, again, right or wrong,
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
just
no, it's
you
good.
have a
It's
natural tendency to lean that way.
Well, when I think when I first saw that, depictions of Jesus, especially, there's a lot of baby Jesus, you know, all around the world, and saw how he's depicted, really reflective of the culture that created the art. It made me think, my first thought was, well, I think that's kind of cool in that an understanding that Jesus wants to relate to us.
Yes.
That he wanted to be one of us, which is exactly what he did.
Absolutely.
Right, by becoming a human child.
That's right.
So I think in one sense, I'm like, I appreciate that idea, and I can appreciate it when I look at other cultures. So if you want to flip that coin, that narrative, right, to the European traditions, then it would make sense, right? They're going to create, pictures of Jesus that look like Europeans.
Right.
So why does this idea of white Jesus become problematic? I think is the question, because nobody's walking around talking about Chinese Jesus or Indian Jesus or African Jesus.
Right. It's probably problematic today for the same reason that if they found another white actress to play Cleopatra, it'd be a problem today. We were like, that is wrong. Like that is historically inaccurate, and we know better, so we should do better.
Sure.
And we have the ability to create or to use different actors, actresses that will depict the actual culture of the people. You can do that.
Yeah.
And so I think that's part of why it would be offensive today. I'm going to say when, movies like that were depicted or when Jesus is being drawn, I don't want to call it total ignorance, but to some degree it's a little bit of ignorance. You are trying to draw something or depict something that's happened in history that we have no idea of what they look like, other than just kind of what history has taught us. True. So there is no physical image of Jesus around here that it was, somebody drew him and passed it on, or wasn't no cameras back there. Definitely didn't have no iPhones. So at that point, you're left to your own imagination. And so you will create what you would create. Now, when more information comes in, and now you've been empowered with more facts centered around the individual, then you try to do a better job at depicting them in a manner in which fully probably more so represents what they may have looked like.
Sure. Well, I mean, were people uninformed that Cleopatra was an Egyptian woman, right? I mean, I think that was known, but they
I think they knew it,
didn't
but-
use that information.
No, but again, I think that they were looking at the culture and society, and they were not putting African Americans
Sure.
or black people
Yeah,
in
yeah.
films like that. Not to mention, if they would have done that, while it might be a classic today and a hit, when they were trying to make money
It
40,
could've
50 years ago, they wouldn't have
bombed
made
out.
no money.
Yeah, yeah.
Who was
it
going to
could've
come to
bombed
it?
out for sure.
Can you imagine a bunch of white people back in like the 60s and stuff like that coming to
Going
watch
to that movie.
Going to that movie to see a black
Is
woman
that like
on the
in the middle
screen?
of segregation and stuff? still
Yeah,
happening?
I want to say it was
Ooh.
60s or 70s.
Oh,
so
that's
yeah, like can you
complicated.
imagine?
That's real complicated.
Yeah, our culture wasn't ready
It
for
wasn't
that
ready
then.
for it.
No.
Well, here's what I was going to actually say is, but it's interesting to me because, so we're talking about Jesus. The
Yes.
information is there, but I went to church throughout my childhood. We weren't consistent churchgoers, but I never remember putting Jesus in his cultural context. Like, he was born in Israel to Jewish parents in the Middle East, was never a part of the Christmas story that I heard. I don't
Right.
know about you.
No, not really. We usually just got if whatever scripture said, that was what was said.
Sure.
But we didn't always read between the lines.
Right.
And that's kind of what you did when you slowed it down, because some of what you said, I believe, is in the Bible. In Israel, Jewish parents.
Yeah.
So some of that's in the Bible, but with the way you slowed it down, you're like, oh, wait, okay, I need to read between the lines. Not to mention, today our world is much smaller because of internet, television. People travel a lot. So we are more engaged with the different cultures of people that are around the world. And
That's
so now when you say Middle East, it arises some images
picture.
that
Yeah.
50 years ago
Yeah.
may not have had
You
those
never
same
met those
images.
people.
That's right. That's right. Yeah.
I think, yeah, and it's not on purpose, right? God, I mean, not on accident. God knows what he's doing and how he came and who he came as. I think it's helpful to walk us through the history, though, before we address, the larger concept, which we haven't really hit much yet on white Jesus, but to really, for our listeners, just like I slowed down, like, who Jesus was when he was born. There was a geographical and cultural context to which he was born into in
Absolutely.
the design of God by the prophetic promises of God. He was the savior of Israel and the savior of the world. He was the promised Messiah to the people of God, specifically that nation, but to the whole world as well. And we don't always think about that culturally. And I think it's important to remember those facts. But I like to think then, like, we're talking about today, like the idea of white Jesus and people who, see themselves as trying to liberate themselves from the white man's religion, want to reject
Right.
him. Where does that come from? Because culturally and factually, there's no basis in truth for that kind of terminology. Now, the conceptually, that we can talk about, but the truth of the facts, right? Jesus was born, lived in Israel, died, resurrected, was still a Jewish man, and rose up into heaven. So that's fact, right?
That is fact.
And people saw him,
Right.
and he is alive today, wherever he is, in heaven, as a Jewish man forever. Like,
Yes.
that's wild,
That
right?
is wild.
But okay, so then, and you can help me out, but I'm just like trace this out. So then, he ascends into heaven. He leaves them with the Great Commission. He says, wait in Jerusalem till you receive powerful mountain high. We have Acts chapter 2 where the church is born, right? And all the surrounding nations are in Jerusalem.
Yep.
Right? It
Jews
says-
from other surrounding nations.
Right.
That's right.
Parthians, Cretes, Medians, whatever,
Yes.
Hittites, all the whatever.
Yes.
Which is literally a listing, if you look at your little Bible map, of all the nations that surrounded the Middle East, Northern Africa. They were all
Right.
from there. They were in Jerusalem. The Holy Spirit came. They all got saved.
And keep in mind, part of the reason why they came is because Jews at this time, because they had lost their land due to the Babylonian captivity, they never really quite got it back. They're now dispersed,
Right.
And so you got
This
Jews
is a-
who are now in Medes or
Right.
this city, that city.
I should look it up.
And because they are there, they have learned some of the culture that is there. They've learned a little bit of the dialect and the language that is there. But because they're all Jew, they come back for Pentecost. They come back for Passover. They come to the
feasts,
temple for
yeah.
the certain feasts. And so that's why so many have come to Jerusalem.
Right.
So you got all these different dialects, all these different Jews
Yes.
who are now dispersed throughout.
Who speak different
Who speak,
languages.
and while they all would have still a common language, well, some of them in a little bit of Hebrew, some of it, or
Maybe.
Aramaic, but at this point in time, they would have had a form of speaking Greek.
Right. Right. Well,
I'm sorry, they all would have spoken some type of Greek.
that was the kingdom.
That was a common language.
Yeah. But so they're all here in Acts chapter 2, just reading it, we each hear them in our own native language.
Yes.
So these were people born in other lands.
That's right.
Of Jewish descent. Parthians, Medes, Elamites, residents of Mesopotamia, Judea, Cappadocia. I'm just reading from Acts chapter 2. Pontus and Asia, Phrygia and Pamphylia, Egypt, and parts of Libya belonging to Cyrene, and visitors from Rome, both Jews and proselytes, Cretans and Arabians. We hear them telling in our own tongues the mighty works of God.
Yes.
So we have people from all the surrounding nations in this moment hearing the glorious goodness of God in their own language, and they say basically how much, what shall we do to be saved? They all come to faith in Jesus, and what's going to happen? They then all go home to their various nations, which you heard, Asia, Africa, Europe, they all just took the gospel to the nations on day one of the birth of the church.
And something else about that is Jews and proselytes.
Right.
So that have been Gentiles who were converted to Judaism.
Right.
So they had a Gentile background, not a Jewish background. So that means when they go home, they don't go home to Jewish families in Rome or Cretan or whatnot, but they go home to Gentile families in those areas because they would have been converted from Gentile to Judaism as proselytes.
So the first wave of Christians, not called that, but that's what they were. The first wave of born-again believers, followers of Jesus, are now already in the nations. And that hit me one day, right? Because Jesus said, hey, stay in Jerusalem till you receive the Holy Spirit. You'll receive power on high, and you'll be my witnesses to Jerusalem, Judea, and the ends of the earth.
Yes.
Well, we thought that was going to take 2,000 years. It started on day one.
It did. It did. And then in Acts chapter 8 with Philip, the Ethiopian eunuch. I mean,
that's the next part of the story.
Yeah, that's the next part of the story. Ethiopian
So
eunuch now gets saved. So he's come to around this time. He's in the area, and I think this is a little bit after what we see in Acts chapter 2.
Yeah.
But he's there at some point in time, and as he's making his way back, he's reading the scripture, and Philip comes along. And he's like, do you understand what you're reading? How can I understand without someone to tell me what I'm reading, to interpret it? And he interprets from Isaiah. I believe that's what the Ethiopian eunuch is reading. He interprets it for him in light of Jesus now.
Yes, because it was a chapter in Isaiah that talks about the suffering servant.
That's right. And at this point, I assume the Ethiopian eunuch hasn't even really heard about Jesus yet.
Right.
So now that he's hearing this scripture through the lens of Jesus, all of a sudden, he's like, what prevents people from being baptized?
Right.
There's some water. And he gets baptized. They come up out the water, and Philip disappears. Like he's whisked away to go to another place to spread the gospel. But at that point, the Ethiopian eunuch were left with the concept that he rejoices. He's truly saved, and he will go back, and he will then influence parts of Ethiopia / Africa with Christianity.
To this very day.
That's right. There's I want to say, is it a Coptic church I've heard of?
Yeah.
That said they may date back to the Ethiopian church.
To that guy.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's crazy.
The gospel was there in Africa.
Yeah.
Before
the slave trade.
What are you talking about? Yeah, I mean, yes, absolutely. And that's the point we're making. We forgot what we missed in the timeline is the wise men, the magi from the east. They saw the star. They followed the prophetic scriptures. They met Jesus as a baby, worshipped him, and went back to their lands.
And they would have told people.
I would assume with the news of this Messiah.
Yeah, sure.
So the news of Jesus is spreading all throughout the world, and every part is being touched, and probably the least of which, at that point, were the European nations.
Until
Rome is mentioned.
Right, Rome is mentioned. Probably. I won't say the least, but I get your point because we're in the Middle East at this point in time, and so
we're going east to Asia.
Yep.
We're going west to Africa.
But then
we got some people up there in Rome.
Paul will make quite the journey, though.
Okay, now talk about that.
Well, because Paul, in a couple of missionary journeys, he will make quite the journey into some areas that I think border southern part of
a lot of his ministry, right?
Eurasia,
was
type
Turkey,
area.
Greece,
so
Rome.
Yeah, Rome. Yeah. So you do have that. I would not want to dismiss some of the places or countries that have had a lot of those who are European descent because of Rome, and due to Rome's just influence during this time and the power in which it possessed. The fact that you have even in Acts chapter 2, I think you mentioned Rome in Acts chapter 2.
Yeah, yep.
The fact that you even have some people going back to Rome is, I mean, it's gonna have its influence.
Yeah.
Because that's what it had an influence.
Yeah.
I think we just hear about the travels of Paul and Philip and Peter in that Middle Eastern region because they're the main characters
Right.
who have been given the charge to go do this. And so the Bible, while it is man's story, it could also be it's the Jewish story also.
Yeah,
because
totally.
everybody, while we're all in there, our stories are not all being told, but definitely the history of Judaism is being told as it then transforms into Christianity.
Yeah.
And those main characters, most of them Jews, who are spreading the word. And so it does not give us kind of all of the stories of those who are doing the same work at the same time. And it's not until, you get to, like Augustine and Tertullian and Augustine.
Africans.
Yeah, who are pictured as white men.
But they're not.
I know. I know. I mean, first time I saw a picture of Augustine, he had on like this robe, like you tell was a lot of Catholicism bent because at that time the church was Catholic back then. Universal Church was Catholic during that time. But it's a picture of a white man, and I remember talking to a white guy one time who was the first one to tell me, "There's no way
he wasn't white.
He was white. Like there's no way. There's no way." But even that, we don't have an actual picture of these early church fathers or individuals who were very committed to the faith and really took a stand. So whether we're talking about, again, Tertullian, Irenaeus, any of these individuals, we really don't know what they look like.
And for the listener, these ancient saints often quoted in Christianity today, the three that Coy just mentioned are all from African lands.
Yeah, they are.
And that's why I wanted to do this, right? Let's talk about it, right? Like talking about how the gospel began and how it began to be spread. It was centered in Jerusalem. The church began there, the gospel began there, and then began to spread to every part of the world. Like it didn't just go to Europe and then come to the U.S. years later. It went all over the world. Like it literally was carried by Philip into the East, into Asia. The Indian Christians of today, the nation of India, trace their roots to Philip.
Okay.
That he brought the gospel to the Indian subcontinent.
Which would make sense.
Right.
Because he does disappear out of the story after the Ethiopian eunuch story. I don't know that we see him much more after that. And so
we have the Ethiopian eunuch bringing the gospel to Africa.
Yep.
And they, to this day, the presence of the gospel is there. Paul bringing it to Rome,
for
sure. And so we've
got some other areas, but definitely Rome.
All of the directions are being covered, and the gospel moving in power in every direction. But having it centered there in Jerusalem, we don't talk about that. Because it moved away from that, right?
Or we talk about it and we just don't spend a lot of time reading between the lines.
Yeah, reading between the lines, sure.
Yeah.
Here's my question is, so the gospel began to be spread there in Jerusalem under Roman occupation, right?
Yes.
Like Rome was ruling, the Jews were the underdogs. And some people like to remember and recall that Jesus came, and now we're going to get a little more into our topic, although we haven't finished our history lesson, is they like to remember that, and some people take it a little too far, but that Jesus was born to an underdog people. He was the face of the oppressed in the picture. He was not a face of the people in power, which would have been Rome, which would have been white people, which would have been, people who were over others, holding all the power, holding all the money. I mean, except for, there's the Pharisees in there trying to get their bag.
That's right.
That's a whole nother story for another day. We talked about that last time.
I think we did,
But that's not the picture of Jesus. Now we're getting there, right? When he's depicted as this Germanic, European-looking guy, right? Because traditionally, throughout history, and especially the most modern history, white people are never been those in the place of being the oppressed.
Well, unless they're being oppressed by other white people.
by other white
Yeah,
people.
and,
Sure.
and we would say in the modern
sure.
history, so we would probably say, well, I guess the last 1,500, almost 2,000 years.
Yeah.
Because if Jesus shows up, 400 BC, I mean, it couldn't be BC anymore, then, or 600, 700 BC, then obviously if he shows up in Israel, he's with the ruling class. If he shows up, back during the times of pharaohs in Egypt, and he shows up then, and if he shows up as a black man, then he would show up with the ruling class. So you're right. Outside of the time when Israel had its own nation, anytime he would have shown up where Israel was either not a nation or as a nation now being oppressed. Okay, so that's a good point. And prior to what we have, well, I would say Alexander the Great. I mean, maybe there's some sense of European descent in what you see in the Babylonian captivity and stuff like that. But I'm not 100% sure. I'm not a historian. But you're right. I would say around Rome's time, maybe Alexander the Great. All of a sudden, there is a huge European or a sense of power now belonging to those who are white.
Sure. With that, if you want to flip the coin to the other side, if we keep Jesus with his Middle Eastern face, Israel specifically, except for times way past, has almost always historically been the underdog.
Well, yeah. I mean, they have a period of their history where they're on top, but yeah.
Old Testament history.
Well, yeah.
Very troubled.
Yeah. But part of what
isn't
Jesus,
that interesting?
That isn't. But part of what Jesus comes to is we're not going to do what we did. We already did that.
Conquer the world.
Yeah,
through force.
We've already given you a nation. We've made you great, and that didn't work that well. So we'll just let you be amongst the people.
Right.
And just know that your Messiah has come, and he didn't come to really reign here on earth like y'all thought. He came to reign superior over earth, but from heaven.
Yeah.
Okay? So, yeah, he was a part of a group of individuals who, during that time in their history, were not at the top rung.
Right. And he didn't even, at that time, restore them to top rung. Not in the natural.
And he still hasn't.
Right. Not in the natural.
Yeah, not in the natural.
Right.
No.
But we reign in life.
That's
anyways.
right. Absolutely.
This kingdom is not of this world.
Right.
Right.
That's
so
what he says.
It seems like the place where this gets perhaps problematic, and I haven't done all the research, so
Neither have I.
take it all with a two
we're
grains of salt.
2 grains. We're just sitting here having a conversation
Two
based
grains
on
of salt.
our limited knowledge of what we
Yes.
do know, what we've experienced.
Is that at a point in the history around Constantine, Rome adopted Christianity.
Yes.
Right? And Rome, as a political entity, was always an overruling power, right? Even in the time of Jesus, right? Like their goal was military might, take more land, take more ground. And so if you then attach to that this Messiah figure, and then you paint him in your image,
right,
then you've created a different picture of who Jesus is.
You know what's interesting? I didn't think about it from that perspective. Like, I knew all of that stuff, like, subconsciously. But prior to that, there probably hadn't been many depictions of Jesus being drawn.
I don't know.
Because people were probably just sharing the message. But you're right, Rome, and I don't think it's so much. I think Rome's philosophy was it was the greatest nation, and so we need to infiltrate everyone.
Yes.
So to be like us. And when you feel superior like that, then you make everything that you think is superior in your own mind. Like, this is what it should be like. And something else that's interesting is other nations, when they ruled, didn't necessarily quite rule the same way. So when we go back to ancient Egypt and that early time where Egyptians ruled, Egyptian ruled from Egypt. Like, they were the chief power, but it wasn't like Egypt just went out and let's conquer the whole world. Let's just, no, we the baddest, you know it. If you come up in here, we'll show you. But I think even with Israel, I mean, once they conquered the promised land, they got attacked.
They didn't
and
go.
it was like, we got to fight.
They didn't go imperial.
No.
They weren't trying to be imperialists.
No. And of course, it starts a lot with, I think, Alexander the Great. Well, no, I guess.
Constantine.
No, Babylon.
Okay.
Trying
to get our
300.
history straight.
Yeah. At that point, they trying to, like, really, we're going to take over everything. And then you go to Alexander the Great after you get Babylon and Babylon, Chaldean, and what takes place in Assyria, those nations, and then you Alexander the Great, now down to Rome, and and it is as if every nation after that probably almost up, I guess, until England. I guess I don't know, but definitely Rome. Yeah, wanted to. If the idea of imperialism was huge.
Yeah.
Make everybody. Well, Germany, Hitler.
Oh yeah.
Wanted the same thing.
Yeah. Gonna take over.
Yeah, take over everything.
Yeah. So when
dude, that is a. You know what? Everybody we just mentioned. They're white. Like,
what are you trying to say?
Something wrong with your people.
No, it's not true. So let's paint it in another light before we make the bullseye too strong. Something's wrong with white people.
Nothing's wrong with white people. White people are just fine.
So why does depiction of Jesus being white? So let me play out that thread one more step.
Okay.
So Rome is imperialistic by nature.
Yep.
They adopt Christianity, and now that becomes part of their imperialism, which could be good, could be bad, but mixed motives probably didn't do it great, right? But like you want to bring, let's assume the best. You're going to bring the gospel to the world. But the gospel comes along with you conquering people and lands.
Yeah, that's true.
With the picture of white Jesus as your mascot. We have a big problem, right? Okay, but so I was going to flip the script. Like, why? Because, someone who hasn't thought these thoughts would be like, I still don't get it. What's the problem? Like, imagine Genghis Khan, right? This like violent, imperialistic, I'm taking over and I'm crushing everyone in my way, he adopted Christianity in his exploits. And now Jesus is painted to look like him.
Yeah.
And everywhere they go, it's a Genghis Khan looking Jesus.
That's right.
We would say that's problematic. Because now you've co-opted, the Son of God for your, domineering plans.
That's a good point. And I'm glad you brought in Genghis Khan because he's not white.
No, that's why I said that.
Is that why you said that?
You see how I did that?
That's a really good point. And so you're right. Even though, and I would assume Constantine had good motives because the story of Constantine, with him being in war and having a dream of the Christian, he had a dream with it. It was a Christian symbol. So when he woke up, he was like, you know what? He made everybody convert. We're gonna be Christians, and so he wins. Okay, and then at that point, he's like, oh,
God's with
Rome,
us.
that's
obviously.
right. God's with us. This is the God. And so at that point, now Christians who have been, burned at the stake, chased down, persecuted, put in prison, put in the arenas to be, for entertainment, to be eaten alive or whatnot, are now elevated.
Yeah.
And now the priest, or I should say the preacher now who was trying to go in hiding now becomes a priest type figure next to Constantine. And now all of a sudden Christianity is elevated. So I think that initially the motivation was probably a good motivation, but you bring up an interesting point. Where if I have an imperialistic attitude or thought process, then that means that part of imperialism is believing that what you're doing is the best.
Right.
And you do have to impose that on everyone else. And so as they're imposing that and they're imposing Jesus, at some point when you're going to start making an image of him because you're so far away from his actual life, death, and resurrection, and then technology or just people wanting, let's create an image of it.
Right.
And so whether or not they were calculated in that to say we're going to teach people that not only are we right as a culture, as a nation, Rome, but also white is right. I don't know if that was
I don't know that it
I don't know
was
that that was that.
motivating.
Right. I think it was just we're going to draw Jesus like we are.
Right. Yeah.
Because if he's with us, then he's right. We're right. He's got to be white. Because white is right.
So, So let's play it out then, like to modern day, and where this comes down to is, there are some, irony of it, right? Because you play it out today, like, okay, so, what do we want to call it? Imperialism, whatever you want to call it, travel, pilgrimage comes to the United States.
Mm-hmm.
America's born, white people, Christianity is rooted, takes off on the North and South American continent. Fast forward to today, and real true blue, genuine believers, right, from America with the gospel of Jesus begin to travel to the nations. And when they go back to the Middle East,
Mm-hmm.
they say it's the white man's religion.
Yeah.
Even though Jesus came for
wow.
that. That's the irony. That wasn't where I was going, but that just hit me. I'm like,
That is
whoa.
irony. You're right.
The irony of it. But continue. We can come back to that. But continue with the thread you started. This is where it does get problematic, right? Like I see the value of Jesus identifying with us. I don't know if he's offended if we paint him in our color or not. I haven't had that conversation with Jesus. But where it gets dangerous then, right, is like, and that's one reason I want to discuss on the episode here, is like, who is Jesus? We know who he is by the word of God, right? He's the Son of God. He's holy. He's sinless. He's without blame.
Yeah.
And this, should give us pause, right? Oh, maybe this is why God said, don't make images of me, But so then if the most holy figure that ever existed and the Savior of the world is now depicted mainly as this white European dude, what subconscious message are we sending?
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean,
It says like the holiest,
yeah.
the most revered is the white guy.
Yeah.
Subconsciously.
Subconsciously. And
And that's where the idea of white Jesus is so problematic.
sure.
Because then you bring it to the American lands where, the natives are then trampled under feet and forcibly converted. And then the Atlantic slave trade with Africans here.
Mm-hmm.
We have the gospel and Christianity all intermingled in that mess.
Yeah.
And that's where I think the idea of Jesus looking like the white person is problematic.
Yeah. Sure.
Because then he's aligned with the slave trader,
Yeah.
He's aligned with why am I not have the right word for the people who came to the Americas?
Native Americans?
What
Indians?
No, the people that came. What do we call the
Oh,
explorers?
explorers,
Yeah, the
pilgrims.
Explorers. It's mixed up with the explorers.
That's
Somehow
true.
Jesus and Christianity is attached to them and their behavior
But
toward the Native Americans.
But
stuff
sure,
like that.
but he would be because, listen, whenever I have imperialistic thoughts or I have the feeling that I'm better than you, then I'm gonna impose that on you, and that can be through gender, that can be through economics, that can be through my religion,
Right.
it can be through my race. I mean, it can be through all of that. And so, if I think that I'm better, and I think that people have a tendency to think that they're better than other people, we struggle with that.
We do. We always want to find our place in the hierarchy.
We do.
Almost we don't talk about it. It's subconscious, but in every situation, where do I land?
Yeah.
Where's my place of power in this room?
Yeah.
Where do I land? Who's above me, and who's beneath me,
Yeah.
and how can I make sure nobody tries to put me down?
And if
You know
I
what
walk
mean?
into the room and everybody's looking at me like I'm at the top, how do I make sure I stay here?
Ooh,
So I got to make sure
What
I
is that
stay
in
here
human nature?
by making sure that you all realize that you're not quite where I'm at. In fact, you need me in order to kind of get where I'm at. Yeah. And it's hard not to do that. It's hard not to at some point in time impose who you are onto someone else.
yeah, or try to maintain some kind of or gain some kind of position of power.
Yeah.
I don't like to feel helpless.
And even as the American church, even though we're getting away from the idea of white Jesus, which I'm fine with that. But even the American church, we often think that the American church or the church in America, the way Christianity is practiced in America, is the way the rest of the world should be doing it. And when we go see them doing it differently, it's like, what are they doing? And now, granted, when we get some culture about us, some education, and we get more informed, we kind of celebrate what we see other people doing and how they worship the Lord and the experiences they bring to the table. But there's a piece of it that still thinks, well, it should be done the way we do it, though.
Yeah, because that's our experience.
That is our experience.
And obviously that's
Yeah.
the best.
Yeah. And when we go over and we set up different things with missions and stuff like that, there are times we try to help them have church like we do.
Because it's what we know.
It's what we know.
We don't know of another expression.
But unfortunately, we don't seek another expression either.
most of the time.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hopefully we're getting wiser in this day and age.
I think we
but,
are.
Yeah.
I think we are. I think we are.
I mean, and let me just stop to put a caveat here. I'm not picking on white people. I'm a white person. I'm not trying to say we're bad or the devil. I just want to point out why this is a thing for some people, and it's why it's worth talking about.
Yeah.
And having more genuine, authentic historical context for who Jesus is, and maintaining that for a way that's good for us and the witness of the gospel to the world.
And if we were having this conversation 10,000 years ago,
matters.
it would be different.
Sure.
Because our world would look different, one. And two, and during that time, Africa was the dominant nation. I mean, Egypt was a dominant nation. And so 10,000 years ago,
That's
we'd be
different,
sitting
right?
here and I'd be looking at you like, pale face or something like that, right?
Yeah. Ooh. How the tables could have turned. Let me read you this quote I found on this website called the conciliarpost.com, which they call a forum for meaningful dialogue across Christian traditions. And now I'm coming back to white Jesus, but this is a quote. The problem with a white Christ is that as a group, white people have possessed the most power, wealth, and privilege in society and in the world. And Jesus did not become incarnate among the powerful Romans or even the elite Jewish leaders, but he took up his place among the poor and oppressed in the land. And that's true.
That's true.
That's why it does become problematic.
So let me throw this out there.
Doesn't mean he doesn't like us. We need to be saved
so
just as much as anybody else.
I have seen very few other depictions of Jesus in my lifetime. So when you said that you have been some places and you seen like you were in a place.
I saw it was an art research of like the nativity throughout cultures.
Okay.
It was really cool.
I bet.
I loved it.
And so I like the idea of different cultures when they depict Jesus, depicting them to
as
look
one
like
of them.
him. Right. That makes so much sense.
Doesn't it?
And I think that it helps out with the presentation of the gospel message.
Yes.
Because it's like,
it's not some foreigner.
That's right.
Yeah.
Okay? So that part is good.
It is.
Now, the question is, do we want to forego our natural desire and propensity to want to be wanted and loved by the most powerful person in the world to ever have existed, and they look like us? We want to forego that for an actual depiction of what he may have looked like.
Or historically more accurate.
Yeah. Do we actually want to? Because, man, can you imagine all of a sudden this Easter, all the churches throughout the United States said, look, we're not got no more images of baby Jesus being white. That's not it. He's got to have some pigment in there. He's got to have a little bit, maybe a little curly hair. That would rock some people's world.
But why?
I don't know.
Does it change who he is?
Why would it rock your world? Because it wouldn't rock my world. I'd be fine with it. I
You'd be all right?
I'd be fine. Interestingly enough,
growing up, what did Jesus look like in your church?
He was white. When I pictured
in your
Jesus,
black church?
Yeah.
Jesus was white.
Yeah, he was white.
Wow.
Now but around that time when I was a kid, that's when they started making the African American study Bibles and depictions of black people in the Bible. And so, it was during that time that I had a Bible that had all black people in it.
Oh wow.
Okay, I got it when I was a teenager.
All black people.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if that's
And
accurate either.
Well, I mean, it was trying to show us. But let me say that the main characters are black. Okay? So interestingly enough, when I think about Jesus, he's white. I don't really even imagine a Jesus other than a Jesus who was white, because it's so ingrained in my head.
Let's talk about this. That's very interesting. Would you consider your average Jewish or Middle Eastern person white?
Sometimes I do.
Right.
Yeah.
Why is that?
Because they're very light skinned. Today, I don't know what it was like several hundred years ago. But today, a lot of Jews that I come in contact with, especially I come in contact with them usually in the context of being in the United States. They do look white to me. I mean, you can tell they're Jewish because of maybe the clothes that they're wearing, but
even the dispersion of the Jews that we talked about in Acts chapter 2,
right?
They're not ethnically Israeli.
They wouldn't
100%.
No.
They've
spread, right. Yes. I mean, so they'd have been some of all different colors.
Yeah. You got, and today, right, you got Russian Jews, you've got Eastern European Jews, American Jews, and they're not necessarily an ethnicity as much as a culture.
As a culture.
Which is interesting.
Well, one thing I was talking to our Bible study recently here is Jews are one of the only groups of individuals that I know who their heritage or their, who they are, their culture, their race is also connected to their religion.
Right.
Like when I think about Africans, that's not associated with a particular religion. It's just not.
That's a large group of people you're talking about.
Who?
Africans.
I know. But I'm just saying, like when you think about when you mention Jews or the Jewish nation,
yeah,
part of what makes them very distinct is their
it's
religion is
tied.
attached.
Yeah, it's religiously
to who
tied.
they are. Like it's just
Yeah.
and I don't know of
Yeah.
another
Yeah.
group of individuals who that's what it is.
Sure. I mean, I'm thinking of it now too. I'm like, well, what about some of the Asian nations? They're very some of them can be very tied to their religion, whether it's
I understand
Buddhism or
but when you
Hinduism,
say
but
Judaism,
Jew is definitely the top of the list.
It's right.
Yep.
So yeah, but you say like, what would that be like if we were to actually? So I wouldn't have a problem with it if we decided we're going to start to depict Jesus more historically accurate.
Sure.
To me, because I've read the Bible enough, I can read between the lines. So even though I have to consciously think about Jesus not being white, because unconsciously he's white, right? So I have to consciously think about it. I know enough about the Bible. I know our history well enough to kind of understand why things are the way that they are, so it doesn't bother me. So if we went with more historically accurate picture of Jesus, I would appreciate that. Mm-hmm. I think that would be cool.
Yeah.
But man, I think there's a lot of people. And I said if America just did it. So I ain't talking about throughout the world. If America did this, man, you think we're divided over politics. Oh my goodness.
So like.
Could Christians, what's the sad thing is? I'm saying to you, I'm suggesting, because I don't know, it would be such a challenge for the church in America to accept that and to walk with peace with one another. Just due to just the amount of mental disturbance.
Well, okay, so and I get what you're saying. I mean, would it be that rough? I don't know. We'd have to see. Maybe we should try. Who's out there listening? Let's do this next year in all of our churches. Because we have such a big listenership. But let's roll it back. Like, imagine after 9/11, and not just like baby Jesus, but like, but if we had like historically accurate depictions of Jesus and like. In post 9/11 America, if we started, what would we be? How would we be looking at art of Jesus who looks like a Middle Eastern man? Like that would be a visceral response, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
Or think of people today in like heavily Muslim worlds that convert.
Yes.
And Jesus looked like a Jew.
Mm-hmm.
Like, woof.
That would be.
This would be something.
It would be.
Right. Just in terms of your comment, I want to talk about one other sort of factoid, and then maybe we should wrap with some pastoral questions and thoughts. But again, first debunking that there is any reality to following Jesus. See, I'm hesitating to say Christianity, because Christianity as a religion has been very co-opted. In a way that. Yeah, it can become a white people's thing. If it's an institutional religion that we're trying to force upon people. But let's keep it in simple terms that the idea of following Jesus belongs to any cultural group. The only one that would fit would be, him being a Jewish man, Messiah. But where was I going? Today. So debunking that idea that there's somehow it's white or white man's religion, because it can't be. It's not by virtue of the truth.
It wasn't started by a white man,
today,
and it wasn't spread by
our world,
just white men. Right.
It was been spread in modern times by a lot of white people for sure. But today, the place where the gospel is bearing the most fruit, where the most people are coming to Christ, is not in white lands. It's in Latin America. It's in Africa, and it's in Asia. All non-white
Sure.
places. So how could it possibly be seen as a white man's religion when all the brown peoples of the earth are receiving Jesus as Lord? You know what I mean? So that's the last piece of just fact, and that's right now. That's the world we're living right now. And thank God for all the white people that took the gospel to the nations.
Absolutely.
It's working.
Yeah.
It's
Absolutely.
working.
Absolutely.
That's why it's growing.
Yes.
It was taken to these people, and it's bearing it took root and it's bearing fruit.
And what we're seeing too is like,
praise
so
God.
whether it was white, black, red, or yellow, individuals from the time that Jesus said go
Have been
and
going.
make disciples, they have been going. And it didn't matter what their culture was, it didn't matter what their color was, they were going. And so when we see maybe a lot of individuals who maybe in the last couple hundred years who have been white, who have been going, praise God for it. They're not the only ones going.
Nope.
Just like what we talked about in Acts. We get certain people's story because they're the
Yeah.
main characters, but it was still going. There are other individuals who are making it go, but praise God for all of the individuals who are making it go.
Yeah. And the gospel works.
Oh, it does.
And that's the messy part, right? Like, if Rome adopted Christianity and took Christianity to other lands, they probably did a lot of things wrong, but the gospel still has power.
That's right.
It still saves souls.
That's
There's
right.
still people in heaven. Like, I don't get it. God's in his wisdom is going to have to unravel that to my renewed mind in heaven.
Yes,
Because
yes.
I think that about the church today, too. We have a lot of mixture in our churches.
Yes, we do.
And leaders who do things that are wrong and evil, and yet God is at work in the midst of tainted leadership.
Yes.
That doesn't make sense to me, because I'd be like, no, I'm not doing nothing with you. But God's just so good and he loves people so much.
Well, if he wasn't in the midst of tainted leadership, nobody's
Well,
going to heaven.
okay,
I mean,
fine.
like, we're all tainted.
Go there. But you know what I'm talking about. Abusive people, abusive churches, but the gospel bearing fruit.
Something I would
You know
like,
what I mean?
Yeah, something I like to add too, as we kind of, I know we're about to wrap this up, because we opened up with white man's religion, but we didn't really I don't know that we went into all the depths of it. We talked around
Well,
it.
I wanted to come back to it.
I know.
How do we speak to that?
I think we gotta recognize it's when we say white man's religion and that's what Christianity is. That's a lie.
It is.
That's a lie.
That's what we're talking about.
Yeah, that's a lie. That's not what Christianity is. That's not who Jesus is. That's not what the message of the gospel is. It is true that many white people have gotten a hold of the gospel and then in their spreading it have also spread some other ideologies and views that maybe should not have been spread in conjunction with it.
Right.
But at the end of the day, every group of people, when they are simply spreading the gospel, will spread some of their ideologies, some of their views.
Might be a little
that
tainted.
Maybe shouldn't be spread at the same time.
Yeah.
Okay, so I don't care if you're
Yeah.
black, white,
Yeah.
care if you're Asian, I don't care if
Yeah,
you're
yeah.
Hispanic. At some point, you're going to infuse some of your culture into your religion. And so, while we can say about Judaism, it is for sure the one group of individuals who their religion is associated with their nationality. It is very much true that whatever your nationality is, whatever your religion is associated with that, when you go, you take a portion of not only your religion, but also your nationality.
Well, it's part of who you are, yeah.
Part of who you are. Okay? And that is one of our struggles
It is.
with coming together as a body. We seem to too often think that when we're worshiping Jesus, he looks like us. We worship him in our context, and he likes what we're doing because it's working and it's good. We go to somebody else's context, and even if we unintentionally allow who we are and what we know, what our experience to leak in, it's leaking in. But at the same time, those who it's leaking into have to be willing to let it leak in. At the same time as theirs is being shared with the one who's is leaking in. There is no way two people can come together and agree on everything.
Oh, for sure. For sure.
And what's crazy is when it comes to marriage, you make that sucker work a lot of times, right? Because too much is wrapped up kids, money, too much is wrapped up into this. But when it comes to Christianity, when it comes to the church, we forget that just as challenging as it can be to be in a relationship with our spouses, our children, our siblings, family members, it's just as challenging within the church. But the goal is to embrace that challenge because we're better together.
Yeah, that's so true.
Yeah.
I think there's something to be said for maybe learning to live more from. I feel like we talked this in our last segments too. Being citizens of another kingdom. You see, we bring our nationality, our background, into who we are and what we do. Yes, but what if we really, as followers of Jesus, learn to live as citizens of another kingdom? citizens of another world, because we are. And that's what brings us together.
It does. Which is why when I said earlier, when I imagine Jesus, unless I consciously make him a different color, he's white, doesn't even bother me.
That's
Because
good.
at the end of the day, I know the gospel. I really don't care what color he is. I really don't care about that. I care about the fact that he loves me. And maybe when I get to heaven, I won't be as shocked when he doesn't look like me.
Right.
As some other folks will be like, what? Who is the guy with the holes in his hands and the holes in his feet? Like, who is that guy, right?
There's only one. And I guess a topic for another day, probably not, would be, the overcorrection of Black Jesus.
Sure.
Absolutely. But I think the pastoral question is, and there's probably more, but in 2024, in the United States where we live, which is becoming sort of post-Christian in a sense, we don't have, those being born today are not growing up in the same, United States where Christianity was assumed.
Sure.
Where Jesus as the only way is assumed.
That's right.
It's a very different world we live in. And so how do we present or represent Jesus to a generation that may hear things about, well, Jesus is just the white man's religion, or other false narratives that might make them reject Jesus out of hand, or because there's today's generation, all information is equal. You know what I mean? Like, someone said this, someone said that. I kind of get to choose which one I want to believe.
That's true.
How do we present a Jesus that isn't colored by our cultural narrative and debunk the false narratives? That's the question.
That's a great question. Well, I'm sure there are multiple answers. The one that I would give is just simply teach the Bible. Seriously. Like in our church, we don't have any images of Jesus.
Yeah.
Where you can see like a race. We might have like some images where it's like a shadow or something like that because it's that time of year. But but it's a profile, but it's not. There are no. I see you looking around, right? You're looking.
You got the manger scene back
We got
here.
the manger, right? And it's a shadow. Yeah. So we don't really depict images of Jesus here, and I don't want to say that we sat down and said, "Oh, we shouldn't do this." It's just it's unnecessary because any image that I give you of him will probably be somewhat historically inaccurate,
right?
In an attempt to be historically accurate, but also it will be probably historically inaccurate, one, because Jesus lived 2,000 years ago. And so while I know there was the same race of people out there, but like 2,000 years ago, there were no African Americans. So people's skin tone and melanin, it changes over time. And because the world at that time was a melting pot, Jesus might have actually been of a certain tone or skin color, although being Jewish. Although being born in a certain region, he may have been a little bit lighter, a little bit dark. I don't know.
Yeah, we don't actually know.
I don't know.
We don't know.
So that means any image that I give of Jesus will still be impacted by my own preferences, experiences, and ways and lenses in which I see life.
Yeah.
And so I just don't give one. Let's acknowledge the truth. He was a Jewish man born in the Middle East. We know that because the scriptures say that. And so at that point in time, however you imagine him in your head, whatever, I'm fine with that. But I'm not trying to give you the image. And I think if we did more of that, and because
stick close to the word.
Yeah, stick close to the word. Because our world is expanding and the world's becoming so much smaller. So now when you say somebody is Jew or you say somebody is African, like there are gonna be images depicted in people's heads anyway. As long as I don't keep giving them one.
Yeah, and maybe being mindful to, what's the word I'm looking at? But mindful to detangle our own, let's say, personal imperialism.
It's good.
From how we live out our Christianity, if you will, live out our faith. Let's say that. And thinking about that, because like even what we were talking about, like our personal propensity in any given situation to find our place of power or our rightful position, like that's not the Jesus way.
No, it's not.
And we can't let the gospel get tainted. With that, to the best of our ability, how does our gospel become completely selfless and completely Jesus honoring? Because I think that's what's disarming. Like, I believe that anyone that actually encounters the reality of who Jesus is, it's completely disarming. and completely life transforming.
Yeah.
You know, and our job as his representatives is to somehow represent him to
Yeah.
people that don't know him, that haven't seen him. How can we be the picture of, who cares what color we are? How can we be the picture of unconditional love that Jesus was? Because that's what changed people's lives. That's the woman in adultery is thrown at his feet. What transformed her? The law? No. It was that she saw the unconditional love of Jesus. And in a moment, I believe, reading between the lines, she was changed. She was given value so that when he then said, go and sin no more, she had the ability to do so because she wasn't the person that landed at his feet.
Yeah.
She was transformed. She was changed by coming face to face with unconditional love. I think if we can become that kind of Jesus to the world around us, then we can debunk the idea that he looks a certain way, you know, or has certain cultural accoutrements attached to him, because he doesn't.
You know, something that you just said, man, you acknowledge Jesus being pretty much the opposite of what we expected him to be when we think about him in terms of me.
Yeah.
When you think about him in terms of you, like, he didn't come to reign. He didn't, you know, he didn't put people back in power. I mean, like, he just, it's not what we would expect. So what if we started telling people, think about the group of people or the race of people that you like the least. Imagine Jesus looking like that.
That would be powerful, right?
I think so, because if the person you like the least is the one that you see as God who still loves you.
Wow.
And is actually dying for you. And wants, like, if we start to look at Jesus as the opposite of what we like and what we wanted, we might understand the gospel better. And then we might go live it with a greater commitment.
Which is another reflection, right? Because we were completely different, completely the opposite of Jesus.
Yes.
And he loved us.
He loved us. Yes.
You know what I mean?
Yes.
But would give us, again, your picture. We got to get away from the pictures, but your picture hopefully would give us compassion.
Yes.
That we lack.
Absolutely.
You know, it's terrible that you could say that you could actually say to someone, who is the kind of people that you like the least, and that they have an answer for that.
Well,
first of all,
well, they do. They do. So,
but it's a lack of compassion.
It is. And if you can see compassion from someone who you don't like, it may cause you to now have more compassion towards people that you don't like. Which, I don't know, sounds like Jesus.
Yeah. I mean, when you
like,
were saying, and we can start to wrap it up, right? But when you were starting to say that, you know, how the way Jesus came was not powerful in our estimation. I thought, oh my gosh, he's the most powerful person in existence, walking in the weakest manner possible.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's the gospel.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
That is.
Because he knew he was powerful. He didn't have to prove it.
No, he did.
He didn't have anything to prove to anyone.
And to me, that's real power.
It is.
That's real power right there.
And the gospel is power.
Absolutely.
And we have power, so we shouldn't be ashamed of the gospel.
No, we shouldn't.
If somebody thinks it's white man's religion, we can show them it's not.
No, it's not. It's not.
Gospel is power. That was fun.
That was fun. And you know, it's interesting because we don't always know where these are going to go when we start. I mean, we have like a small idea, like a small little outline to work with, but then we get into it and, you know, I wonder what our listeners are going to think. I'm sure they'll let us know.
Please let us know. Thanks for joining us here on Pulpit Aside. Usually do this part. Maybe you should do it.
What do I do?
You close.
How do I close?
Yeah.
Man, it's been so long. Listen, we want to thank you for joining us on Pulpit Aside. We really appreciate you listening on today. Please like, share, and subscribe. They can subscribe, right?
Yeah. Leave a review.
That's right. Leave a review. Leave some feedback.
Tell your neighbors.
Really appreciate you all taking out the time to listen to two guys simply having a conversation.
Merry Christmas and Happy New Year.
God bless. Take care. We'll see you soon.